Now, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov is addressing the United Nations General Assembly in New York, and we can cross live to his speech.
The world displayed an unprecedented level of solidarity by rejecting old phobia and stereotypes. It seemed that the global anti-terrorist coalition had become a new reality that from then on would define the development of international relations, which was free from double standards and would be beneficial to all. The coming together in the face of the deadly threats emanating from Al-Qaeda and other elements of the terrorist international made it possible to achieve tangible success during this first stage. After that, however, problems began to grow. A painful blow to the unity of the anti-terrorist coalition was that delivered by the war in Iraq, when, as it turned out later, under the false pretext of the fight against terror and nuclear arms proliferation, international law was violated. In a wholly artificial way, the deepest of crises was created, and it is far from having been resolved until now. Increasing questions are being raised as to events going on in Afghanistan. First and foremost, what is an acceptable price to pay in terms of loss of life of civilian population in the ongoing counter-terrorist operation? Who decides on criteria for determining proportionality in the use of force? And why are the international contingents present unwilling to engage in the fight against the spreading drug threat that results in increasing suffering in the countries of Central Asia and Europe? These and other factors give us reason to believe that the counterterrorism coalition is faced with a crisis. And looking at the very core of the problem, it seems that this coalition lacks the requisite collective arrangements, i.e. equality among all its members in decision-making, both on strategy and especially regarding operational tactics. It so happens that in order to manage an entirely new situation as it evolved after the 9th of September, and which required genuine cooperation work, including joint analysis and coordination of practical steps, mechanisms designed for a unipolar world started to be used, one where decisions are taken in one center of power, and while all the rest were merely to follow. What we ended up with was a privatization of the international community's effort in the fight against terrorism. The inertia of the unipolar world also relieved itself in other spheres of international life, including unilateral steps taken in anti-missile defense and the militarization of outer space, as well as attempts to bypass the situation of parity in arms control regimes, an expansion of political and military blocs, the politicization of issues of access to energy resource and their transport. The illusion of the existence of a unipolar world confused many. For some people, it generated a desire to place all their eggs in its basket. In exchange for absolute loyalty, they expected to enjoy a carte blanche to resolve all their problems using any means. The emerging all-permissive syndrome that they acquired went on a rampage on the night of the 8th of August when aggression was unleashed on South Ossetia. The bombing of the sleeping city of Chinval, the killing of civilians and peacekeepers, trampled underfoot all existing settlement agreements, putting an end to Georgia's territorial integrity. Russia helped South Ossetia to repel this aggression and discharged its duty to protect its citizens and fulfill its peacekeeping commitments. The recognition of the independence of South Ossetia and Abkhazia by Russia was the only possible step to be taken to ensure not only their security, but also the very survival of their people, taking into account the previous experience of chauvinism demonstrated by Georgian leaders, started with the Georgian leader Gamzakhodya, who back in 1991, and under the slogan of Georgia for Georgians, ordered the deportation of Ossetians to Russia, abolished the autonomous status of South Ossetia and Abkhazia, and later unleashed a bloody war against them. An end was put to the war then at the cost of innumerable human lives. Create peacekeeping negotiation mechanisms which had the approval of the UN and the OSCE. However, the current Georgian leadership has pursued a persistent policy of undermining these mechanisms through relentless provocations, and finally brought to naught the peace process by launching a new bloody war on the night of August 8th. This problem is now closed. The future of the people of Abkhazia and South Ossetia has been reliably secured by the treaties signed between Moscow and Chinval and Sahum. With the implementation of the Medvedev-Sarkozy plan, which we are strongly committed to, the situation around these two republics is finally going to be stabilized. What is important here is that this plan should be strictly and unswervingly implemented by all parties. We are concerned by attempts undertaken to rewrite it post factum. I believe that everyone here has tired of the role of playing extras for the Georgian regime, whose words contain not a shred of truth and whose foreign policy is aimed exclusively at provoking confrontation throughout the world in pursuit of their own objectives, invariably running counter to the objectives of the Georgian people or those of guaranteeing security in the Caucasus. Today, there is a need to analyze the crisis in the Caucasus from the point of view of its impact on the region and the international community as a whole. The world has changed yet again. It has become absolutely clear that the solidarity demonstrated after the 9th of September needs to be revived through concepts untainted by geopolitical expediency and built on a rejection of double standards when fighting any violations and breaches of international law, whether it be by terrorism, by political extremists, or anyone else. The crisis in the Caucasus has shown again that it is impossible to resolve the existing problems when blinded by the mirage of the unipolar world. The price that we will have to pay in terms of human lives and destinies is too high. We cannot tolerate any attempts to resolve conflict situations by violating international agreements or by the unlawful use of force. If we allow this once, then we run the risk of unleashing it in the future. One cannot abstractly invoke the duty to defend and then be outraged when this principle is used in practice, and this in strict conformity with Article 51 of the UN Charter and other norms of international law. In South Ossetia, Russia defended the very highest of our common values, the most essential human right, the right to live. The existing security architecture in Europe did not pass the test of recent events. Attempts to adjust it to the rules of a unipolar world have led to a situation where this architecture proved itself incapable of containing an aggressor or to prevent the supplies of offensive weapons to it, contrary to all existing relevant codes of conduct. We propose that we should look at this in a comprehensive way. The President of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, speaking in Berlin on the 5th of June, proposed an initiative on developing a treaty on a Euro-Atlantic security treaty, a type of Helsinki II. We could have started this work at the Pan-European Summit with the participation of both states as well as all organizations active in this region. The treaty which we propose is meant to create a reliable collective system of security which would ensure equal security for all states and in a legally binding form enshrine the basis for interrelations and interactions between all its participants to strengthen peace and stability, and finally to promote an integrated and manageable development across the vast Euro-Atlantic region. We're referring here to a process where everyone would reaffirm their commitment to fundamental principles of international law, such as the non-use of force, the peaceful settlement of disputes, sovereignty, territorial integrity, and non-interference in internal affairs, as well as the inadmissibility of strengthening one's own security by infringing or endangering the security of others. We also need together to ponder about new mechanisms to ensure compliance with these fundamental principles. Of course, such a treaty should be one which organically fits into the legal framework of the UN Charter and its principles of collective security. The Cold War distorted the nature of international relations and turned them into an arena for ideological confrontation. It's only now, after the Cold War, after its end, that the United Nations, created on the basis of a polycentric vision of the world, can fully realize its potential. Today, as never before, it is important that all states reaffirm their commitment to the United Nations as a global forum without any alternative, which possesses a universal mandate and generally recognized legitimacy as a center for open, candid, frank debate and coordination of global policies on a just and equitable basis free of any double standards. This is an essential requirement to ensure that the world regain its equilibrium. The numerous challenges facing mankind, requiring the comprehensive strengthening of the United Nations. In order to keep up with the times, the United Nations requires further rational reforming to gradually adapt to existing political and economic realities. On the whole, we're satisfied by the progress of reform, including the first results of the activities of the recently established Peace-Building Commission and the Human Rights Council. As regards the expansion of the UN Security Council membership, we, of course, will welcome proposals that do not divide the UN member states, but rather facilitate the search for mutually acceptable compromises and lead to widespread agreement. The increasing importance is the development of dialogue and partnership with civilizations. Russia supports the Alliance of Civilizations as well as other initiatives in this area. We reaffirm our proposal to create under the aegis of the United Nations a consultative council of religions, which would take into account the increasing role of the religious component in international life. This will contribute to strengthening moral principles and enshrining them, incorporating them into international affairs. Recently, among the new priorities in the UN's activities, we have such issues as preventing climate change, food and energy security. These problems are global in nature. They're interrelated, and they can only be addressed and resolved via global partnership at a new qualitative level, with an active involvement by governments, science, the business community, and civil society. Of special attention here is what requires a special attention is financial crisis. Important initiatives were put forward from this very rostrum by the President of France. Initiatives aimed at the cooperative joint search for the ways to revitalize the international financial system involving all the leading economies of the world. In this context, we support further development of partnerships between existing G8 members with key states of all developing regions. The Economic and Social Council of the United Nations could play a role here. Russia will continue to participate in a most responsible manner in the work of various UN bodies of the UN system and in all other formats in search for an equitable solution to all these problems. The mechanisms being created in Russia for international development assistance will help us to increase the extent and efficiency of our participation in international efforts to fight hunger and disease, promote wider access to education, overcome energy deficiencies and shortcomings, and this will be our additional contribution to attaining the Millennium Development Goals. It is absolutely clear that we will grant special attention to assisting countries which are close to us. All countries are partners with whom they share traditional, friendly relations based on common history and geography. It is wrong to artificially undermine these relationships for the benefits of geopolitical schemes as well as against the will of the peoples themselves. We will continue to work with all our neighbors, first and foremost with the CIS. We will continue to develop the integration process within the CSTO and the Eurasian Economic Council to preserve as well as to promote our common heritage of culture and civilization, which in a globalizing world is an important resource of the Commonwealth and of each of its member states individual. And this is why we have a special interest in cooperating with these countries, and for the same reason they view Russia as an area of their special interest. We will therefore develop our relations exclusively on the basis of equality, mutual benefit, respect and consideration of others' interest, and in compliance of existing agreements, especially on those of the peaceful settlement of disputes. This is how we intend to develop our relations in other regions of the world, to do so openly, on the basis of international law, without any zero-sum games. This is a policy which was set out in the concept of foreign policy, which was adopted by the President of the Russian Federation, Mr. Medvedev, this July. Russia is consistently implementing its network diplomacy and promoting cooperation in various possible formats: the SCO, BRICS, partnership mechanism for the EU, ASEAN, the Organization of the Islamic Conference, the League of Arab States, as well as regional organizations in Latin America. The events of August provide us with yet another occasion to to readdress the responsibility for what actually happened. A distortion of reality hampers international efforts to settle conflicts and crises, and it revives the worst practices of the era of the Cold War. If we want to protect the truth and ensure that doesn't become the first victim of war, we need to draw the relevant conclusions, especially regarding the elaboration of a provision in the 1970 Declaration of Principles of International Law, which states that states shall refrain from propaganda of war of aggression. This is in line with what was recently adopted by the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe on freedom of expression and information in times of crisis. I propose that the UN should also voice its view on this time in a universal context. The obvious global consequences of the crisis in the Caucasus shows that the world has changed for everyone. There are fewer illusions now. There are fewer pretexts to shirk answers to the most pressing challenges of modern times. It is precisely this which provides us with a hope that the international community will be able to, based on common sense, finally manage to put together a program of collective actions for the 21st century. Thank you.